Many of you may have heard of Red Tomato. It's a food hub that's been around for a while, and it's one of the things that I think about a lot in relation to it is how they approach their role within the value chain, and they're kind of interesting and unique in that a lot of the way they show up is not unlike what a value chain coordinator does, connecting the dots, building relationships, helping things to get from A to B, kind of like the wizard behind the curtain. But then there also are a food hub and really making not only product move from A to B, but the way the product shows up and the farmer's relationship with the product and how the consumer understands the farmer's relationship with the product really centered and brought forward. So I'm not going to tell their story for them. So I'm going to hand it off to Michael Rozyne, the founder and now evangelist for Red Tomato, and Angel Mendez, the executive director of Red Tomato, who I know some of you already know, and let them take it from there. Andrew, anything to share before we get rolling?
A little excited to have Michael and Angel here, and just also to point out, Angel's been serving as a mentor for the Food Systems Leadership Network for 7 or 8 years now, and so has really been a core partner since we started, and just supported folks in the network and learned from that. And I'll turn it over to y'all. I'm going to stop the share, and I'll get them on spotlight.
Yeah, and I'll just encourage everybody to listen actively and maybe make a note somewhere if you have a thought or question. We are going to chat all together once they've shared the stories, and so we'll have an opportunity to talk further.
Awesome. So thanks, Andrew and Eric, and thank you everyone here for letting us crash your party. Happy to be here. So I'll give you a snapshot of how me and Michael are gonna present here. So I'm gonna start with laying the context and giving you guys a okay, spotlight. Giving you guys the way I see the speed of trust, kind of a short context on that. I'll pass it to Michael. Michael's gonna share his story on a story on the speed of trust, and then Michael will pass it back to me. I'll share my story on the speed of trust as well. All right. So let me tell you what the speed of trust means to me and how I think about it. When trust is present, communication flows more smoothly, decisions are made more efficiently, and collaboration is more effective. Trust accelerates the pace at which tasks can be completed and goals can be achieved. In my view, the speed of trust is not just about moving quickly, it's about moving with purpose and confidence. It's about building strong relationships based on honesty, integrity, and reliability. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Michael to share one of his stories on the speed of trust. And we'll illustrate 2 examples of how it shows up on our work.
Thanks, Angel. So if I had to give this story a title, I think I'd call it How I Nearly Blew 10 Years of Relationship Equity with a Room Full of Farmers all at once. So there was this winter meeting, which Red Tomato holds every year for our entire grower network. We work with 40 farmers in the northeastern US, and half of them are apple growers, also grow stone fruit, some of them. And this was about 2010, and we were at Cold Spring Orchard, the University of Massachusetts experiment station, and it's called Cold Spring Orchard. It was February, I think, and it was cold in that room. I remember that. We're all sitting on these metal folding chairs, 20 growers, about 8 agricultural scientists, 8 Red Tomato employees, and we were in Belchertown, Massachusetts, and we'd been doing this for about 4 years, and we were there. So you need to get this story, you need to understand a little bit about my background. Before Red Tomato, which I started in 1997, I was at Equal Exchange, a fair trade worker-owned cooperative that I had co-founded in 1985. And we were working internationally with very small scale growers of coffee largely, also tea and chocolate. And so when I started Red Tomato, I had to make this transition to fair trade philosophy to the local turf. How do you do that? What about the values of fair trade are we going to bring to the Northeast US? So a lot of the hardest work was actually around what's a fair price, because in the fair trade movement, it was all formulaic. And so I spent a couple of years trying to figure out how do you move to a fair price in the produce world where prices change all the time. And we came up with a concept called the dignity price, which is another session of explanation. But the main thing here was that there were other values of fair trade that I was still really working on. And one of them was farm worker well-being. So by 2010, I had kind of figured, well, maybe it's time to really dig into this concept of what does farm worker well-being mean in our group? I had been visiting our farms constantly. It's really the best part of the job was the amount of time that we get as Red Tomato employees, we get to spend visiting the growers that we work with. And one thing that was really evident was that the orchard growers who rely largely on guest worker programs like H2A, and in the Northeast, they employ mostly Jamaican men who come for 3 to 6 months to work on their orchards, including the all-important harvest. And there was a lot of pride that the growers had in their relationships. And there just seemed to be some collegiality. And even in some cases, 2 generations of a family, a father and a son would work on the farms, and that they would be there for a long time. So I felt like, okay, it's time to begin the discussion in our meeting, in this grower meeting, about farm worker well-being. Is there a way that we can turn this into an opportunity? Can we make this, our growers in the apple world are organized around, I don't know if you can see this brand, Eco Certified. And this is our signature program where we certify growers as sustainable local growers of really great fruit. And the question I was asking myself was, well, can we make farm worker well-being a pillar in this program and slowly develop it into part of the program? So to accomplish this, I invited a speaker and I handed out a report. The speaker was Eric Nicholson, who was a vice president of the United Farm Workers Union. And he had led numerous national campaigns against agribusiness companies with the hope of getting better wages and better working conditions for farm workers. And I also handed out this hot off the press report, which was called Close to Slavery, produced by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it was really all about the H-2A guest worker program in the US. And to give you an idea of why these two things, inviting Eric and this report, were maybe not such a brilliant idea, let me read you a page from this report. Bound to a single employer and without access to legal resources, guest workers are, routinely cheated out of wages, forced to mortgage their futures to obtain low-wage temporary jobs, held virtually captive by employers or labor brokers who seize their documents, forced to live in squalid conditions, denied medical benefits for on-the-job injuries. House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Charles Rangel put it this way: this guest worker program's the closest thing I've ever seen to slavery. So you may be wondering what I was wondering as I look back on this meeting, which is, what was I thinking back then in 2010? So the two reasons that this was less than a brilliant idea was because I had invited a union guy to speak to a room full of growers, half of whom were very conservative and extremely cautious about unions in general. And secondly, I had assumed that the growers would look at this report the way I did. The way I looked at it was, yeah, this program, the way it's conducted by agribusiness in the West and in the South and really large scale farms can be really oppressive. But I was really proud of what I had seen on the smaller scale Northeast farms. And I felt like, hey, this is something, this is a victory we can claim. This is a place where we can say, we do it better here. And there's real room for pride to be taken. But the growers, as we handed out this report and they started reading this, suddenly the room became so tense. You could cut the atmosphere with a knife. It was really heavy, and I was beginning to sweat bullets facilitating this room. So remember, like, I'm in this room where I have been building relationships for over 10 years, and I feel like I really know this grower group. And suddenly I'm getting darts aimed right at my head. And so I was about to introduce this union guy to speak, and it was too tense for me to even go forward. So there comes this moment when John Lyman, who is kind of decidedly the grower leader in the group, also one of the most conservative members of our group, but a real advocate for the eco certified program and a real fan of Red Tomato. In fact, he was the farmer rep on our board. He gets up in the room and he says, "Folks, hold it, hold it." And he just puts his hands up and just says, "Chill." I don't think he used that word. That's a more modern word. He said something else that meant chill, everybody. And he said, "We don't even know what Eric wanted to say to us. And we haven't even let Michael say the reason for this topic on the agenda. Let's give Red Tomato and Eric Nicholson a chance to talk." So John was able to do what I wasn't at the time, and people kind of settled down enough. I introduced Eric, and the reason I had invited Eric was because he's a remarkable organizer and has just a level of depth of experience that I hadn't met. He has tremendous empathy for farm workers and had been working for the UFW for a long time, but he also has empathy for farmers, and he really knows how to wear their shoes and talk. So Eric talked for about 30 minutes, and by the end of it, the growers were engaging. And it ended up being a pretty darn good general discussion. And when the meeting kind of broke for coffee and tea and donuts, those fabulous cider donuts that the growers always bring to the meeting, a few growers invited him to their orchard. And he did, on his next trip to the Northeast, visit some of these orchards. In fact, one of them, I remembered a grower from upstate New York, had set up Eric and said, if my neighbors ever see you coming to my farm, I'm going to get a lot of shit from my neighbors, bringing a union guy into this county. But this is way upstate New York. So he arranged for him to meet Eric at a truck stop on the highway. And as Eric was driving to the farm, he gets a call from the grower, and he's approaching, and the grower says, "You know what? This is ridiculous. I can't meet you at a truck stop. Just come to the farm. Nothing's gonna happen." So they had a meeting at the farm. So speed of trust. Thinking back on this moment, now I can kind of lighten up a little bit and smile about it, which I couldn't at the time. But it could have gone another way. It could have been, as all of you who meet with growers regularly, you can picture this. It could have been a room where the growers just internalized all of their anger and tension, and kind of the room could have gone from super tense to completely quiet, and the meeting would have broken up and some people would have left, and maybe I would have gotten a sense of their anger and frustration, maybe not. It could have been that situation. It's really easy for me to picture that. But what actually happened, as I thought back on it, was that there was actually a lot of straight talk and there was transparency. And the growers shared their anger and frustration on the spot. And there was respect, actually, shown in the way John Lyman acted at first, and then the way the growers kind of lightened up and turned towards Eric in the end. And I felt like, yeah, was a far from perfect. I'm not even sure I'd say successful encounter, but that conversation continued in that group of growers. And I would say that the response in the room showed actually that we had been building up trust for years with this team of growers, to the point where kind of when the hit the fan, we were able to process it and kind of right the wrong that had been done and stick with the relationship. And that event didn't really cost us any long-term harm or pain. So I'll leave it there. Angel, tell us your story.
Deep breath. All right. So I recently read an excerpt from Stephen Covey's book on this topic, and the writing made a lot of sense to me. I'm going to use some of those concepts throughout my story here. The first thing I want to talk to you about is credibility, my credibility as an organizer. The second thing I want to discuss is everybody's behavior and collaboration, including myself. Credibility, behavior. Let me start with credibility. There are four things I want to mention about my credibility that may be going through people's minds. Integrity. Do my words align with my actions? Do I walk what I talk? Intent. What is my intent? Am I genuine? Am I for real? Can you trust my intent? Capabilities. What are my capabilities? What am I bringing to the table? 4, results. What is my track record? Do I have results to show? Now I'm going to tell you about the 4 traits of behavior in building the speed of trust. Talking straight. Are we talking straight to each other? Are we leaning into the uncomfortable? Or as people hear me say a lot around the office, are we leaning into the hard edges? Show respect. Am I showing up with respect? Also, do I have the respect of others in the room? Create transparency. Am I being totally transparent? Is there important information that I'm withholding from the group that may cause assumptions in storytelling, as our brains are so powerful at doing that? Number 4 is to right your wrongs. Am I acknowledging my mistakes? Am I working hard to make amends when I make mistakes? In 2021, we launched the Food Access Supply Chain Program with collaborators from the towns of Bridgeport and Hartford, Connecticut. The purpose of our work together was to co-create a supply chain that would pay local farmers a fair price and deliver healthy, affordable, and accessible farm fresh food to these 2 communities. Understanding and respecting food sovereignty, we came into the work with an approach to bring our expertise in procurement and supply chain management to the table. But the development of what the supply chain should look like was to be totally driven by the community. We were just bringing our knowledge around procurement, supply chain, managing the whole thing, our food hub stuff. Wanted to respect food sovereignty and have the community totally guide how we build it, knowing that we could build a prototype in this community and bring that prototype to other communities, but that the basis of that prototype would remain the same: aggregation points, delivery, pickup at farms, all of the cool stuff that you guys may be aware of in logistics. But we knew that the basis would be the same and the program would be informed by the community. So to so here and here to create so here's my version of this. I put more into my own words. So here's my version of this. I hope we can do this in less than 100 years. I come from operations and I'm a systems thinker, so I naturally like to pull things apart and understand how they work together. I am also a get it done personality, so it can be tough for me to be in rooms where I don't feel the forward movement in a timely fashion. I can be highly impatient, anxious, and begin to question the process. In my tenure in food systems work, I've participated in many collaborative spaces and had always been frustrated at how hard it always is. Lots of great people with really good heartfelt intentions coming together to collaborate around a common goal. We would have rich discussions, share great ideas, and strategize, then little to nothing happening in the form of action. People were excited to discuss the possibilities, but when the rubber hit the road, it felt like that energy would crawl back into a shell. So I knew that I couldn't enter this world alone, and I really wanted to kind of launch this project, knowing what we knew, knowing that we could make this food access and affordability happen. So, but I knew I couldn't go and do it on my own. It would just drive me totally insane. So I went in there and we found and hired a collaboration consultant to support the facilitation and trust building in our collaboration. Who knew there were people out there that work on collaboration as their full-time gig? Our consultant is great at this work and helped us pay attention to the principles of building trust for partnership and helped us be comfortable with the pace of movement. He constantly reminded us to get the group's engagement in co-creation. We needed not to operate as if there was a transaction because we came from Red Tomato, we're running the food hub, we're working with farmers, we're in the marketplace, we're running programs, exploring new ways of doing business, but everything kind of has that feel of a transaction. This was different. He constantly reminded us that we had to move away from the feeling of transaction, to give up our personal beliefs, to go on a journey, engage in a journey of co-creation. We needed to operate, engage on the journey with co-creation. So if you know me, you know that I like to talk a lot. I ramble sometimes. I think sometimes I'm thinking while I'm speaking, and I've got a lot going on up there, right? So I try to manage it regularly. But today, after a lot of this support from our coach, I practice more listening than I do talking and trying to understand and give people space and not bring in my own personal beliefs and intentions, but go on that journey and kind of see where it takes us, knowing what I know, also being comfortable to go into the land of the unknown. So there were those oh shit moments where I thought, man, we will never get this off the ground. What is holding us back? Why is everyone not engaged? And our coach constantly reminded us to build trust in the group and to move and to continue to build trust in the group, continue to get folks engaged, continue to kind of share our learning plan and continuously bring back to the group, practice transparency and our behavior, our some of those core competencies I mentioned earlier in my presentation around trust. And so he kept reminding us about that, and we started to implement that. We were more conscious around that. We came into the rooms and gave the floor to the community and really kind of try to hold back Red Tomato and let the community speak about what they needed, what they wanted, how this program was showing up for them, and how different it was for each different collaborator in the room. As we kind of started to do that and started to bring new items and started to show things moving, we were able to get engagement around a pilot. We launched the pilot. We started moving. We were around 20K in sales in the first year, and we kind of kept moving it. It wasn't about sales, but I'm saying sales so you understand that's the volume metric that I have. We were about 20K in sales for the first year, and we continue to kind of build and work with them, and it's trust. The trust flows throughout the whole program. You have to build trust with new farmers in order to get those farmers to want to join the program at a small scale and go on this journey with you. You have to build trust with new customers to understand that they're entering something different than a regular transaction, but that they're building and supporting work within a community. You have to build trust within those stakeholders. Everybody that's in that room is the most important one, right? That because if there's no trust in that room, you don't move. But then if you move, if you get the trust in the room and you start moving, then the trust is kind of like, it's almost like continuous improvement. It's like you got to keep building trust along the way, keep building genuine. It's more like the way you roll in life, right? So we continue to do that. We started to get more engagement. The program went from 20K to closing in 2023 around 147K in sales. We've got we've added more participants into the program. We started out with probably around, I think it was around 3 to 4 participants. I'd say today we have around 10 to 15 participants, a combination of food pantries, hospitals, also institutions, and we're working with urban farms inside of all of this pool distribution that we're trying to make happen. Since then, we've also added dairy and something different that we don't do, but the community said we want dairy. And so we got dairy in there, and we're exploring adding protein because it's driven by the community. Our goal is to make sure that everything works in logistics so that we're paying farmers a fair price, decreasing costs, making food affordable and accessible into those communities through polling purchasing and decreasing the fixed cost of logistics. So, although I have been doing this work in food systems change for 20 plus years, it still frustrates me at times, but I've learned to be comfortable and accept that all things move way better at the speed of trust, specifically in systems change work and food systems change work, but all systems change work and collaboration. Think of trust as a form of currency that can make or break relationships, businesses and societies in our personal and professional lives. Trust can significantly impact the speed and effectiveness of any endeavor. I learned about the trust tax and the trust dividend, and this is what I'll kind of close out and leave you with to think about. The trust tax represents the hidden costs of mistrust in the form of bureaucracy, redundancy, and inefficiency. In contrast, the trust dividend represents the benefits of trust, such as increased speed, collaboration, and innovation. So as you move through your work and your personal lives, remember that all the things move at the speed of trust. And in Covey's words, you can either pay the trust tax or enjoy the trust dividend, depending on the level of trust present. Thank you, everyone.
That was awesome. Thank you, folks. We've got a couple of comments, and feel free to sort of build on the comments if you shared them or if you've been reflecting with questions. I've got a quick opener for each Michael and Angel to get things rolling, and Andrew may have some other things or that he captured. So keep it coming, and the appreciation. I don't know if the speakers have the chance or the wherewithal, having just put all that out there, to look at the chat, but you're getting a lot of appreciation from folks out there. So thank you for all of that, the openness, and also the wisdom that you earned through the journeys you shared. So for Michael, one of the things that I heard was this idea of in the world that I come from, we would call it a container, but that the time that you had spent building those relationships with people actually became sort of a holding environment in which some tension or some conflict could sit without sort of bursting out the bottom and having everything fall out, and have the relationships disintegrate. And one of the things I noticed within that was that you were able, and folks kind of commented on this, that you were able to feel and read the silence and also get a sense of how that silence shifted. And that's one of the things in my work that sometimes it's a little bit less obvious because, you know, people can be scared of silence, but it's also something you can really use to get a sense of where a group is, and it feels different if there's a lot of trust or if there's about to be a fist fight. So any quick further thoughts on that, you know, the relationship building and how you could really feel that you had something to stand on because of the time you'd invested in building those grower relationships?
Yeah, I mean, listening to you, I mean, I can imagine two kinds of silence. One, one is where you got a room full of people and nobody's saying anything, and you can't for the life of you figure out if you just completely bored the pants off of them and they're just thinking about everything they're going to do as soon as they can get out of the room. You know, I think we all have been there. And the other kind of silence is what an Angel was in this room. We experienced this past summer with a group of 8 large, kind of our larger grower team as we were preparing a bid for one of our larger supermarket customers. And we put out a proposal. So you got to remember, this is in the year where there is so much apple production in the world. It's way too much. And the prices went to the tanks. And everybody is having one of the most difficult years they've had. We brought a proposal that was more aggressive, lower price than we ever have to this team to try to get their consensus on. And when we put it out there, the room was dead silent. The difference now was that we knew these folks really well, and we'd been through this process with them, I'd say like 10 to 12 years in a row. And at that moment, we could read the room really well. It was Angel and me and our supply chain manager, Susanna Hinman, and we knew that we had put something out there that was so provocative and potentially hard, maybe even distasteful, and that was exactly right. And that led to a really deep discussion about what the heck we're all doing together if this is where the economy is going. So, yeah, two versions of silence.
Thank you so much for that. In my version, there's 4 versions, but we'll save that for another day. Um, so Angel, you know, Alan had touched on his comments earlier, this idea of being humble and what becomes possible when you're sort of the stance you take in a situation is like, I don't need to prove anything. I'm just curious about what's going on and how you shifted your approach to emphasizing listening more. And then the thing that you said that really sounded really interesting to me, it reminded me of a flywheel, you know, where you put energy into something and then take a little while to get it moving, but once it's moving, you know, it has this momentum that's self-reinforcing. And I'm just curious if you have any more comments on that shift towards leaning on the listening and how that can build momentum over time, you know, that kind of, you were saying it kind of becomes the way you are, the way you roll. And then the trust becomes more second nature in the relationships.
Yeah, I think I give it a shot here. Well, no, I move from the heart in everything that I do, right? So full of love as the Lord tells me to move that way, right? And so I think that part supports a lot of my genuinity coming into the room and my track record in there and working with people. And so where was I going to go with this? I was trying to give you an example of so yeah, so for me, part of what I come from operations. So I constantly moving and I like the fast-paced environment. I like switching gears and doing multiple things. So coming into those rooms, I've been doing this work for 27 years. So I know a lot about distribution and supply chains. We run a non-asset base. So I come in there with a lot of experience and then I'm kind of ready to move, right? And I realize that when you're anxious, or even when I'm just in meetings and working with my staff or something, and something really excites me, and I bring out that excitement, sometimes it's less useful. And it so see if I'm answering that well, but it's like when I'm starting to get confused here because I'm thinking about too many things. But when I'm in those when I'm in those rooms, I just realized that part of me letting go of kind of my personal beliefs being present in the room and being able to, just go on that journey is really about listening. And it's like, and not passing judgment, right? So I have to kind of listen in that room. I have to not pass judgment, no matter how strong I believe about something. I have to kind of be open-minded and go on the journey, offer more questions and suggestions, but not if I'm trying to own things in a way like I know all the answers, that starts to diminish the trust in the room. People don't feel heard, and that's part of the back and forth. Like, I seen somebody in here say in the comments about like, how do I continue to build a partnership with like the fishermen and things like that. And I think about the distribution partnerships that we built over the years, and I always had that it's a reciprocal relationship. So I'm constantly, checking in with them, seeing how we're doing, how we're performing, letting them know how they're doing. But then I'm also trying to add value, as Michael trained us working with growers, is kind of always looking to see where we add value in the process. So kind of a long answer, but really it's to bring it back. It's really about just being present in that room and holding back, controlling my excitement around things that come up. It's really around just being present. So more active listening, saving all my feedback for later, kind of going on the journey and not jumping to solutions. That's what it's really about. Not jumping to solutions, no problem solving. Let's go on that journey. So that's where I'm listening a lot more.